So thank you all for joining this month's A11yTalks. Each month we get together online to learn about a variety of topics all related to accessibility. So please follow us on Twitter. We're A11yTalks, or A11yTalks, to keep apprised of upcoming sessions, our speakers, and just other relevant information. Also, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to see past and maybe upcoming talks discussed. And with that YouTube ping, I do have to make a note that we are all being recorded. So if your sense of humor is like mine, please keep that tucked in for the next hour. That said, we do want to hear from you. If you have questions or thoughts you'd like to share, please enter them into this chat here on Zoom, or hashtag us on Twitter. And at the end, you'll hear those vocalized and we'll talk through them. So enough of me, on to our main event. Today we're honored to have Sara Tabor, I should have asked you how to pronounce that, I'm sorry, Director of QA at Code and Theory, and she's going to be discussing accessibility in the modern digital agency. She has a dual passion for both accessibility and data security and has been working in the agency realm for a bit over a decade, and the data and software arena for more than 20 years. Well, when not focusing on her growth in this digital space, she can be found working on her new fixer-upper house outside of New York, which at some point I think is going to require pictures or something. And then playing sled hockey, which, to be truthful, I've never heard of, but again, I am fascinated by. But to stay focused on today's session, Sara, are you ready?
I am ready. Thank you so
awesome.
much, Anna. So hello, everybody. My name is Sara Tabor. I'm from Code and Theory. I wanted to talk today about how our agency approaches accessibility, because I think that it's progressively more and more coming to the forefront of how we deal with our clients. Just a high level and some incidentals. This webinar is captioned, and thank you so much to Vanessa from White Coat Captioning. If you wish to turn on closed captioning, please use the CC button in the Zoom app's bottom menu if you're listening to the webinar. There's also backup live captioning on the screen. It's available at bit.ly/A11y_CAP. And all presentation materials we've made available at bit.ly/A11y_agency. Transcripts from this will also be made available once the webinar concludes. And if you have any questions, please ping the webinar chat. We'll discuss at the very end, or use A11yTalks hashtag, or you can message A11yTalks on Twitter. So just a little bit about myself. I threw my bio in here in my picture. It's funny because I actually chopped off all that hair, so I don't really recognize myself in the photo, but high level, I'm a director of quality assurance. What's kind of cool about this at an agency is that it gives me the full broad arena of what all the entire agency deals with, from legalese and how we scope things contractually, to how we are designing things, how we're working on interaction design as well as component level design. We are also heavily interactive with our clients and with our development teams and whatever the development teams need. So as a result, I see a lot of intersectionality of accessibility deliverables to security stuff, to automation for QA engineers, for unit testing, for linters. How are the designers working together? Also, what are our clients' needs? What are the things that they're bringing up? So I have a really broad range of experience. Most of it is financial tech, but I also do a lot of creative technology stuff, especially at my time at Code for the last 5 years. High level, I work for Code and Theory, a digital-first creative agency. And high level, from this perspective, we're based in New York City. We also have offices in San Francisco, Atlanta, Manila, and London. And then also we have folks all over the world available, and just our stellar collaborators and thinkers for whatever shows up. We've been in business and in the digital sphere since Flash was a cool thing. But we are working at the intersection of creativity and technology, and not just as doers, as people that are there to execute upon things, but also strategically looking at what our clients' needs are and kind of starting to untangle a rat's nest of what all needs to have happen to come up with additional generations of technology. Clients come to us and they're like, our website's, blah or boring, or we have this internal issue with needing to change tech stacks or things like that. We do that a lot as well. So it's definitely an interesting place to be, especially when you're observing accessibility. So like I said before, C&T is a really exceptionally iterative environment. We create products on a rapid pace for our clients. I think at any given time, the QA team globally will manage about 25 to 30 different projects. And these can range from like CMSs, CRMs, e-commerce platforms. We had a machine learning with an AR platform combined together for one of our clients. We do hardware software builds, and we end up kind of having to problem solve with our clients in order to come up with the desired result. We will take on all kinds of new technology. We were doing Angular 2 right when it came out, and I went to our tech director who was on the project. He knew quite a bit about accessibility, and I was like, what else is there about accessibility for Angular 2 besides Angular 2's documentation? And he's like, Angular 2's documentation? So there's a lot of times where we get this cutting edge technology and we have to apply the WCAG principles. Like another good one is when we're doing hardware software integrations. There's not necessarily anything out there about how to digitally print and manage a component that is part of a hardware software experience. There's also like not as much information out there about how augmented reality or machine learning learn to work. And we're just hitting the cusp of these things ourselves. What's kind of neat is that the QA team ends up being platform agnostic. I don't have like a mobile tester or a functionality tester or a design tester. They're kind of, the way I describe it is they're paid to thinky things. They're paid to be curious. They're paid to be inquisitive. They're paid to be humble and to kind of be little detectives on how the code and the functionality is intended to work for multiple user scenarios. So we end up observing a lot of difficulties from multiple standpoints. Some of the clients that we have really range. They sometimes are healthcare, or they're financial tech, or they're sneaker manufacturers or sneaker manufacturers or broadcasting. I didn't put this together. When it comes to that sort of stuff, some of the things that we see end up trending over time. Like, how do these companies deal with accessibility internally? So when you're reviewing all this stuff, you're not looking at a specific scope of entity in order to give you feedback. We have it from a broad range of folks. So high level, when I came in 5 years ago, we were doing some accessibility work, but it was mostly clients that were very, very nervous about how to get past compliance or what all is involved, just so that we can cover the basic bases. I think that in the accessibility realm in general, this is a common theme where folks 5 years ago were looking at the standards as just like, let's just get over them. Let's just make it done, make it go away. They weren't necessarily questioning the need of accessibility from like, is it ethically good? It was more along the lines of, can they do this and incorporate it into their existing product? Over the course of time, obviously, back in 2017 and 2018, respectively, we had the Section 508 refresh, and that brought a lot of visibility in accessibility. Our clients started to come to us and say, we have compliance teams that include accessibility now, and their turnaround times maybe 2.5, 3 weeks, so we need to get this stuff prepared. So sometimes it was that perspective, and others are starting to talk to us now more and more about like, well, what is the ramifications of reviewing this in line with Sprint? How do I plan for this when we're doing iterative and agile development and testing. So meanwhile at Code, I decided to put in some baseline structured language into our scope of works, or SOWs. Some of that was regarding WCAG A level as minimum, and there was a few other things like OWASP top 10 and some security things. Why do we want WCAG A level as minimum? That's also in regards to how quality our code is to common standards, how semantic our markup is, what are we doing baseline to make sure some of the stuff is set up appropriately. More and more though now, we're sending more and more scopes out with WCAG AA level. Now it's 2.1, depends on the end user's client or the end client's compliance department, but we try to get for AA 2.1. We had it as the exception before, but now that we are evaluating and say, hey, you're really subject to problems if you run into situations with Section 508 refresh. But now more and more we're hearing news very similar to the security field of like when you hear about companies that lost massive amounts of data or have wide open APIs where people could sniff everything or whatever. On the other side, you have things like Domino's in the news recently about the Supreme Court hearings, or other companies being sued because they don't have an accessible internal intranet system. So we're starting to hear these things, and so are companies. So are people that are making business level directional decisions. The last thing is that more and more clients are coming to us and saying being inclusive is a necessity for our bottom line. They don't care about legalese. They don't care about necessarily a specific standard being met. But more and more they're saying we want the dollar of the disabled person. So that's something that is very evolved. I'm very excited to see our clients progress in this manner because they consider this a untapped market, a value add market that they can include. And so, well, I was working on, let's see here, probably about 3 different CMS projects. We had 3 kind of come in right at about the same time and watching a few different things as they were to progress, doing some estimations based off of what was caught early, what was caught midline, and what was caught late. In this example, I'm doing a cost increment over development timeline. So say, for example, we have a color palette decision. It would take about 6.5 hours to discuss the color palette and indicate to, say, a client's marketing team that these colors may not be accessible in these combinations. Having that discussion up front and then, confirming the expectation if there's colors that need to change. On average, it takes 6.5 hours round trip. It takes a little bit extra if you have to include print materials, but on average, that's where we're sitting, just to even have the dialogue, confirmation, and kind of the blessing to get going. If you find the defect while design is executed, it's about 27 hours worth of work. So if you have a 6 sprint and say, I think it was about 120 to 140 hour average. If you have a change to a color palette, it's about 27 hours worth of design work. This is not only to validate and change the design systems, but also to adjust anything in multiple comps. The 27 is given at like a sprint 5 or sprint 6 of 6 kind of range, or an 8 sprint range when you're closer to the very end. Because if you imagine it, if they change like the green, for example, from one green to another green, you have to find and confirm all the different spots that these things are green. This is also kind of assuming that development hasn't already started on all these green objects. So if development is where it gets caught, it ends up bringing up the entire team's total to 36 hours. You have to change the coding, and hopefully you're doing it in a semantic manner, but you do need to kind of confirm that all these components are consistent with each other still. The developer may also need to confirm with the designer and the directly responsible individual or DRI in our organization, or even the client saying, this is what you want, this is the changes that you want. Yes, let's go. This number actually increments as sprints go along over time. This is also assuming this 36 is an early sprint. So if you're in like a 10 to 12 week or 10 to 12 sprint deliverable for development, you're also incorporating quality assurance time. If this is caught in quality assurance raises their hand and says, hey, this does not pass a color contrast test in any shape or form, and you have this everywhere. You have this green everywhere. On typical average, in order for us to confirm with design, confirm with the client, confirm with development, test and validate, and confirm across multiple locations in the site's ecosystem, it ends up being about 75 hours worth of our work. And if you unfortunately get the brunt of a legal ramification, you're looking at about 150 to 200 hours worth of legal time. For the palette, it was about 157. Again, this is round trip, talking to clients, talking to marketing people, talking to lawyers now, talking to compliance teams, getting everything back and along through the entire the entire execution chain here. But on top of that, this more like the uncalculable is when all of your progressive development stops. If you have any future releases, if you have any new treats or tasty things that you want to get out to your client, that halts the minute that you have legal ramification. And this execution is typically done in relation to other executions. So you're slowing down your forward progress as a company. Standards and severity. So we get clients in that have talked to some folks, and they get some sort of executable that says, top to tail, here's all of your defects, no standard outweighs another. And I agree with that to a specific point. When you're making defects and bugs, part of this also is taking in relation to the functionality and the business requirements for the client. So for example, if I have a color contrast defect on a hover state of a link that is very like a fourth level link, something that's really, really tiny and not noticeable, and it's the hover state, so maybe it's not frequently seen, is that going to be prioritized higher than the main navigation cannot be accessed by a keyboard user? In that case, yes, and that's where the standards versus the business priority or severity or visibility or however you need to measure it, drifts up the prioritization level. So we also include a predetermined definition of defects. And accessibility does align with that in that if you have a blocker, it doesn't necessarily matter if it's a blocker for a keyboard user or it's a blocker for a screen reader user or it's a blocker for a mouse user. A blocker is a blocker is a blocker. If I can't execute a checkout flow, do I necessarily have to say, well, this is more important than something else? No. We look at it as more of the high level priorities and functionality from the client, and that also includes other priorities as well. So these things end up kind of mashing together, and we do, like I said, talk about standards as being one is not prioritized over another, but on the other side of it, we do have to talk about severity in order for us to stay aligned in an agile environment. So our clients come to us with all different sorts of primary motivators. And these are usually, the ones that everybody kind of talks about. The legality standpoint is obviously the big one. I heard that so-and-so is getting sued right now, and now everybody's panicking, and I'm the CTO, and I need to come up with a good idea. Please help me. I need to help implement this so that we don't get sued. The other one that I'm hearing pretty often is the verbose standards conflict of, hey, this is really hard for my teams to ingest. This is something that we struggle with in terms of standardization, or this is something that we struggle just kind of contextualizing and digesting. This is getting better and better as people make more content and provide more samples of code. But this also is kind of shown in when you do audits, you have ARIA tags everywhere, just ARIA, all the things. Unfortunately, the knock-on result, that's the knock-on result of standards that have not been digested by a development or QA team. And the other two are kind of like the good side, like the preferred side, the preferred conversations. You know, it is ethically good, is it or is it not ethically good to include folks with disabilities and not give them a separate but equal option, not make a website that's just for you disabled people. How about we give them all-inclusive access? So when one of my favorite folks that I like to reference is Kat Holmes. When we design for exclusion, it does, like, learning how a person will consume a site if they cannot manipulate it in a visual format, for example. This is something that you can use as your base level and then couple onto it more inclusive components. And that ties into innovation. I mean, a lot of us know about the curb cut effect. But these kinds of things that may be developed for our use, like we have a play pause button, or also include a media query to prefer reduce motion on some of our sites. Maybe folks just don't want to see animations everywhere. They just want to hit that themselves. It was originally designed as an accessible alternative to motion, but in this situation, it's an innovative item to help somebody with just be able to consume the information in their own preferred way. And that person may not identify as disabled. So in our team, I'm going to pat myself on my own back here. QA engineering ends up driving a lot of the change. We do work, we have fantastic designers, we have fantastic interaction designers, we have a wonderful tech development and development crew that all work together for this. But honestly, some of this is leading, like I say, driving the train from the caboose. The QA engineers are the last port of call and kind of sometimes incidentally a safety net. We try to avoid that here, but it's the reality of things. But the other part that's really nice about them is that they are trained observers and are trying to be very neutral about how they discuss things, how they prioritize things, what they do as a recommended fix or give reference material. We are capable also of stepping into multiple user scenarios at the same time. So, for example, I'm just going to take a sip of water. For example, while I'm testing a test as a manual tester, I may be going back and forth to just straight functionality testing. Then maybe I see a design defect and I write that in there, or I see a UI flow kind of quirk, and I'm like, oh, that's not quite right. Or, oh, hey, I wonder what would happen if I was a destructive user and I just was trying to hammer away and get into any sort of cross-site scripting vulnerabilities on this. Okay, no, that's all locked up. So now what I think I'm going to do, you know what? I should test if this is keyboard accessible. Oh, not keyboard accessible, or maybe the error messaging doesn't quite work. It's just something that when you have this curious detective brain and you have a bigger bag of tricks that gets progressively larger over time, this kind of stuff ends up just coupling into a good manual QA engineer's execution. We do also do automation QA in that we use different libraries to write items for it. We actually will write UI validators just for accessibility items, like different kinds of alt text validators and things like that, that get coupled into our CI/CD. But most of our work ends up being working right alongside the manual testers, or being a manual tester and coupling it in and just doing it simultaneously. The team, though, when we are working with folks, the hardest part is being really humble and understanding of different defects that do come up and how to prioritize them versus the needs of what others may be thinking. So talking to designers and saying, hey, when when you have this defect, in the future, come talk to me, and I don't want to override your vision or your design impact, but maybe if you just did it a little bit like this, it would still be accessible, but I think your ideal would still come across. Or talking to our account management team and saying, hey, when you're talking to our clients, this is what we're seeing kind of in the end game at the last port of call. So when you're welcoming them in, maybe talk to them about accessibility as being a good thing and how it is useful for them. And honestly, last part of it is selfish. The less tickets to write to hypothetically delay a sprint close or production release is clean, or the definition of done, which is our take on things. Basically, the best defect is the one you don't have to write. So as much preemptive work as that you can do up front, that holds true in quality assurance, but is extremely doubly true in accessibility testing. So at Code, we have a few different types of QA accessibility project engagement types. This is me as a global director looking at my entire team with different kinds of scenarios in front of us. So there's occasions where we talk to the client or work with designers in a define or design only. These are periods where we're doing requirements gathering and research, as well as kind of putting the research into real concepts. So we're talking to them and making sure their internal ecosystem is structured, and we're recommending strategic executables. We're documenting, we're validating any of the annotations that may need to have specifics added to it. Maybe the client dev is going to be working on this, and we're doing the design work up front. So we'll work with an interaction designer and say, hey, so these annotations are great. We just want you to couple in here some accessibility subset items so that they know exactly how to execute this. For the development and QA, this is our most typical engagement. We're working internal with our own development teams collaboratively, and we work all the way around the world, in a follow the sun engagement. So all work may be in-house, or sometimes we'll have some in-house dev and maybe a vendor, or in-house dev and a client. However things kind of mash up together, the team is the team. So the QA engineers try to work really strongly in collaborating and kind of making that cohesion happen. And as a result, we do alongside our functionality testing, like I said, we include the accessibility stuff. Integrative QA is when the client actually does all of the dev work, and either they have some QA engineers or we're doing all of the QA work and coupling with them. We may be doing like a specialty execution like accessibility, just to kind of get them up and running. In this case, it's really helpful because we're providing granular feedback to the development team, but also one of the best ways to teach a QA engineer how to be a good QA engineer is by making them retest tickets. It's like what every junior gets put on when they're on my team is the ticket queue. So as you're defining and providing steps to reproduce, maybe you're giving reference material, you're making that developer or that QA engineer on your own internal team incrementally better at their job. They're going to understand and also not be have so much agita or just feel wound up about having to research and execute things in an accessible way. One of the other two things that we do is technology strategy and consulting. So talking to them and saying, hey, maybe you have a dev team and this is their process. Let's try to get them in a more agile mode. Maybe talk about having a back-end release structure. And then also let's couple in some accessibility concepts here. Maybe we put them into your code standards. Maybe we recommend some particular linters with some particular rule sets. We're going in there and trying to kind of get to the bottom of why these things just need optimization. And so far we're seeing really good results with that because our clients have internal dev, but like I said, we get exposed to all different kinds of things. We are working in a very iterative environment. And last but not least, we do a little bit of auditing. It's a little different than most of the other folks in the field, but generally speaking, we're writing as QA engineers and creating a bank of tickets, and then either helping out move the flow forward from there in an integrative QA process, or helping to best estimate and prioritize and triage the things for our client side as they move along. So how to involve an internal team? How did our teams kind of evolve for accessibility? What I just really like the fact that my team gets into the trenches with the developers. They're working right alongside them. They're working late nights alongside them. They're pairing with them and saying, let's get through this together, guys. Let's get through this. And that's something that is really hard to kind of come up with that esprit de corps. But I think that a large amount of it can be managed by the accessibility team moving forward. If you are a standalone accessibility person, guru, you want your team to adopt this, this is a really important part of why it has been successful so far. I also kind of worked with the legal team. Obviously, it's important to know where we draw the line in the sand and how to understand our contractual defaults. This also gives yourself the identification of helpful stakeholder, and you can wash, rinse, repeat this for everybody else. What is the deliverable of X team? It's Y product. What can I help you with improving your annotations as a product or as a deliverable? What can I help you with in your comps as a deliverable? How can I bring this stuff forward for you and be that helpful person rather than having that poor person have to go in Google and try to come up with everything? You're that friendly, helpful person that they can identify as being a champion. With pairing with the team members outside of QA, like generally speaking, starting to identify like, oh, that's the tech director. That's Mike. He's gonna help us with any really weird front end questions that I'm a QA engineer. Some of this stuff might be a little old or rusty or completely unknown to me. They're working as well with detangling the mystique, I guess, the fancy mystique of accessibility, because then they become our largest allies and collaborators. They become the people that are like, yo, I know it was really hard when I first started getting involved, or yeah, there's literally no documentation whatsoever about this, except for like the developer's original site. But I got you, let me see what I can help you with. That spirit of collaboration, if it's beyond you individually, is really important. Internal accessibility roadshows and trainings, just spoke with our project managers again. I make a slide deck that has all kinds of oodles and oodles of stuff, but I'll take out the useful tidbits and talk about it in an appropriate conversation method. Like project managers are really interested in timeline and budget and what is the expected deliverable, how is this impacting our user acceptance testing or UAT period. These are the kinds of things that they want to talk about. But this is different than when I talk to our design crew and our content folks, and they have different prerogatives and motivators of what they need to accomplish their job. So I do kind of change out some of that stuff. The other thing is realizing that folks are really busy in an agency or they may not be able to attend the training, looking for synchronous and asynchronous opportunities. We have a Slack channel called Accessibility, #accessibility on our Slack. That's a place for us all to ask questions, but I also take internal questions that are asked similarly to me, and I ask others to do the same to bring them in the Slack channel, not only because it answers a question that somebody else might have, but it also sparks conversation. And, you know, coming up with stuff where like, oh, do you have more research about that? Or, hey, what about this kind of scenario? That's the kind of stuff that we can progressively work on when we have multiple channels for giving that. And finally, plan for a long ball game. I mean, accessibility initiatives are still ongoing after almost 5 years. Not in a bad way, but like in a evolutionary way. Stuff just gets coupled on and more intense, bigger projects, newer tech, more collaboration required. These are the kinds of stuff that we have to work on, and we are always prepared for that thing to change. What we're doing internally, we're pairing with designers and strategists early. The QA team is to discuss an accessibility business requirement while keeping the vision intact. We talked about that a minute ago, but again, just working alongside them, getting very early, talking to project manager and saying, I need to be there day one. I want to talk to them. I want to make sure this is budgeted and estimated for. What's the kind of sprint plan? That kind of stuff. That comes with number one. Again, also pushing the team to stay in an agile methodology rather than pushing all the accessibility stuff towards the end. We do try to do our main or the majority of our tickets at sprint close. And also some projects are working on, absolute close means all tickets are closed. So these are the kinds of things that we're trying to play with and make sure that we don't do things in an incredibly waterfall manner, particularly with accessibility. We kind of come up with team-centric tool sets that are scalable and easily incorporated. One of the easiest ones is Stark for InVision. Once I gave that to a designer who was using InVision on their project, and they're like, oh, this makes total sense. It's so much easier than me doing this manually. I'm like, I know, right? It's so great. Researching and employing a petri dish is what I kind of call it. Am I going to be trying to do tool set evaluations in a silo without any practical knowledge? No, like I want to see what this particular linter is useful for, or if it's just annoying the dev team. How do we kind of manipulate those settings so that on the next project we make it a little better, and the next project we make it a little better? Working on estimation versus time burned as best as possible, because that brings our bottom line a little different from a digital agency standpoint versus a lot of other folks, is that we do work by the billable hour. So valuing valuing that billable hour versus burn rate and things like that. Operationally, as a director, I have to look at that stuff and say, are we being efficient? Are we being effective in our tool set selection, things like that? And these two kind of couple together, although they also are enemies of each other. Massive training, mentoring, and scaling initiatives, particularly within the QA team. We have a large portion of our team now within the last 2 years as accessible, skilled at WCAG standards, and incorporating them into their projects and things like that. Making sure that we have a mentorship program, that we have folks in multiple time zones so that we can do follow the sun and also mentor follow the sun. And 6 is avoidance of being the single point of contact. About 2-3 years ago, my mantra was like scale, baby, scale. And 5 and 6 were always butting heads against each other. When you are that accessibility one-off person and you're not delegating, not only is it super stressful for you, or you're not getting your real job of QA director, your regular job done. But also, like, you're holding folks on your team back. Like, you can delegate these tasks and make them start to shine, make them available so that they can push these things forward. Just really high level, here's like a snapshot of design validation tool sets. Now, design stuff, we usually just kind of stick with WebAIM and Stark. A lot of this is manual discussions. The QA engineer works with the designer side by side and is looking at comps or looking at animations and saying, let's talk through this. However, I really like the Cloudflare Designs color snapper. They have a really nice palette checker, and I love it. It not only scans an existing site, but you can kind of play with secondary, tertiary colors. Spectrum and Funkify are disability simulators, which I don't necessarily like in concept, but it does kind of help explain the point. Spectrum is good for helping folks understand the need for color blindness checking, making sure that color is not the only method for conveying information. If I make this grayscale or I make it a particular type of color blindness, then they're able to understand. And Funkify works in a similar manner. Color Snapper is great for us as QA engineers because we don't necessarily always have the inspection tool while we're going through design. So we can kind of look and see like a image with a color gradient overlay and text on top. What's the net in terms of color contrast? So in terms of tool sets that we use in dev, we use a variety, and this is one that we've played with recently just for this particular client, but we are of course using WebAIM. We're using Storybook and having a linter within Storybook validate if any new code is accessible. Axe is being used as part of a validation script on our CI/CD. We're trying JAWS Inspect Out. It's kind of like my petri dish. We do use Google Lighthouse, and NVDA is our primary, one of our primary screen readers. This also is always subject to change. You know, what's nice is this is one that I gave to a client, but this is going to change for my next client after that. Here's a sample ticket that I've written. Again, making sure that when you're conveying information to the developers, it's really important to make it very clear so that they can immediately understand what's going on, triage the situation, and come up with an expectation for remediation. Sometimes we put in here like a suggested fix, sometimes we don't. That allows the developer to make the determination, self-determination if this needs to be something that is expanded from like a global scale, or maybe there's similar components that we don't necessarily know about, and we don't want to turn them away from a particular component in focus. So this one, for example, puts the priority at highest because again, this selector is not available. Screen reader nav or keyboard user cannot manipulate a date selector, for example, so they can't select a airline ticket. This blocks the adaptive text, so that's why I have that priority as highest. Details about the violation, sometimes I put in reference material here too, and what is the expected behavior. It's surprising that I don't see this information very often when we do have intakes of existing QA work. This is something that is really important because not only does it help the developer understand what's going on, it helps the business understand how to create a time estimate so we can build this into sprints. And then also this gives enough information for any QA engineer with some skill set in advance, the ability to move forward. So how are you going to incorporate all this into your own teams? So when discussing accessibility, devise upfront how this can be operationalized and scaled from the start. I really wish I did that. Last moment thing where I'm like, oh, I should have done that probably 6 months ago. Standardize your tool sets, your baselines, and then also come up with a default ticket template that helps us immensely. The other thing is that couples into it is templatify everything you possibly can. So I have some slides available for talking about accessibility at like a very high level as well as a drill down level that are ready for clients or anything like that. But also I have requests for proposal responses that are ready to go. Anything like that where I can just pick up and give it to somebody and say, read this. That's something that's very useful. When pushing for the accessibility for your teams, check out the primary motivators, right? Like my CTO's motivator for accessibility is different than a front-end developer's motivation, and it's different from a visual designer who are making comps. It is also the same on your client if you're looking to evaluate the client. How are we making this cost-effective, things like that, versus making things beautiful. Those conversations can kind of bubble up, but you may have to give them to a different audience in a different manner, as well as talking about how your organization sells this to your clients. What is useful for their bottom lines? Yes, avoiding legal stuff is important, but also maybe making something more robust or more standard-centric, or something that we can use as like a hub and spoke type of situation. We're going to make this super accessible, and over time, you're going to make this super accessible. Giving them their own tools to understand how that works. Different clients have different needs, and researching what those are in advance is really helpful. Again, pushing for scientific method. My little petri dishes are all over my little projects and saying, hey, try this little thing or try that little thing. It's not just for accessibility, that helps breed an interactive environment, and also reporting afterwards, either doing an evaluation or a retrospective. That's stuff that really helps the entire team move forward and gives context back to me so I can say, okay, cool, let me just try this little extra thing. And finally, consider hiring people with disabilities. I consider myself disabled. I identify as disabled. I think that by me being part of the disabled community and disabled culture, I stay on top of trends that I'm just like, oh yeah, well, this is a socioeconomic picture, or this is what the current hashtag is, or this is what this brand is saying, or this is what disabled entity is saying about this particular brand. I don't know it all, and there's a range of disabled viewpoints, disabled people's viewpoints, but having that has helped me become a better educator because I have more context. Finally, future-proofing and what's on the horizon. For us, we're simplifying our internal tool sets. We're playing, like I said, we're playing around with JAWS Inspect and ASPRO in our CI/CD framework. We're discussing with our clients existing accessibility teams that are going through stuff in the very early stages, talking to them up front and saying, what do you need up front? Like, do I have to prepare a VPAT? What are the tool sets that you're testing on? Devising cooperative plans with other client vendors to produce end-to-end deliverables. So sometimes we are the development vendor, but they may also have a content vendor. How are we making sure that the client's content vendor is making Instagram content or Twitter content accessible? Working on intersectional specializations where data privacy is a big one right now, data privacy and data analytics with accessibility. If we have a media query that allows us to say, I prefer reduced motion, do I then also put an analytics tag saying, did somebody activate that? You know, that's the kind of stuff that we're starting to research, not only from like the execution standpoint, but also the knock-on ramifications. And finally, consulting with clients to detangleize and operationalize. This is something where we've had a client come in and they're like, yeah, we have everything on lock, everything's set up for accessibility, and they do, and it's great. They're super collaborative, and we move forward in the world together. All the way, and this is a range, all the way to we are a brand new group within this business. We need accessibility humans. We need to come up with a process. We need this from scratch. So we have this wide range of folks, and helping them operationalize or get even better is what our goal is. So, Donna, I'll send it back over to you. Any questions or discussion?
We do have just a couple of questions.
Okay, great.
Do you ever find that you're getting pushback from clients on these issues? And if so, where does that raise its head?
We usually have not necessarily pushback, but I think it's a lack of education, of acceptance from earlier parts of the project. Very rarely are we talking to a legal compliance team that's like, no, I don't want to deal with accessibility. It may be much earlier because there are preconceived notions that accessibility is going to make things uglier or not going to make things work as cool or limits innovation. So that's usually where we're having those upfront conversations, both internally and externally. And once we kind of say, no, this is actually really useful, really helpful, it simplifies things, it makes things cleaner and more intelligible for every user. Plus has the added benefit of proper markup standards, etc. We start going in that kind of route. It helps them identify what their fear is and how to kind of override that while still producing like completely amazing designs. It's funny, I'm not a design person, and it's amazing to me to see what people can create that's amazing and beautiful while working within the box.
I fully agree. I've seen some amazing pieces. Now, you mentioned a little bit about having native user testing with your own self-identification as well as just in general.
Mhm.
Do you find that clients are more interested in engaging with, outside teams or third-party teams that are native users, or is that something you all kind of try to incorporate in-house, and where's that balance point?
I think it depends of the type of engagement that we have with the client, obviously. We have the expectation that our QA engineers may not be native screen reader users, for example. So we may actually have a third party come in internally or freelancer and work with them. However, we've also considered doing user research and identifying folks up front that may be disabled so that we get that context of like, how is maybe how is a deaf person going to order food from a restaurant? We're going to do that research up front to give that information to us. That's really the key spot where I like to put folks with disabilities, is giving that context, that upfront stuff before we start to even do all the architecture, do all the taxonomy, do all the design work, all the meat and potatoes. We may have somebody do the mechanical work of screen reader testing, but user research is really where I want to have folks that are available. And again, too, hiring folks with disabilities, somebody can walk right up to my desk and be like, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of this idea? Is it weird? Is it something that's going to clash with how disabled people identify themselves? It kind of goes both ways.
Absolutely. You're speaking right to my heart. So this is wonderful. Thank you. And finally, the question was, I'm sorry, I'm trying to. In regards to this tool list you gave was amazing, and I put the links here in the chat for anyone who didn't do that. I put the links to all the places, and I can always tweet those out later. But with that, are there any tools that you'd recommend for some of that user research aspect, or any particular methodologies that you're bringing people in at that earlier stage to reduce that overhead?
Sure. I think I don't necessarily have a tool set for user research besides perhaps like an eye tracker. There's one called from a company called Toby. They actually designed a eye tracker for user research, so you can see, for example, how a particular person would scan through a grocery aisle. If me in a wheelchair is scanning through a grocery aisle, for example, I'm at 4'9", things at my level are different than things that are at the adult level, the 5 foot plus level. So they may be looking to see what kinds of things I'm looking for. Same thing with eye tracking to see how people are digesting the page and mapping where their eye pinpoints to. But in terms of tool sets, honestly, you're looking at a very journalistic approach. You're looking at somebody who is very empathetic and can open somebody up to give them the real details about what's going on. Am I necessarily evaluating tool sets for user research? Very atypically. Most of the stuff that we're doing is how to do production execution of each of our products. But right now, in terms of when I've had to look for it, that's most of where my stuff has been sitting.
Perfect. And I'm going to do one last check of Twitter. Beautiful. Then, are there any other, if we're going to walk away here with one or two specific thoughts, is there any specific thoughts you want us to just definitely walk away feeling empowered with?
Yeah, I think that if you are a person in a company where you just feel a little bit behind the 8 ball, things kind of happen and you're like, whoa, suddenly requirements. Work hard to be that person, to be proactive, to be in front of things, to come up and be the solution point for folks. Because when people make decisions, there's a lot of times they're just made for their own particular interest, their team's interest. When we communicate with each other and give that context to folks, it does build that knowledge up over time. And Scale, baby, scale. Don't be the only person in your organization that's the accessibility person, unless that is your job, in which case, good job, keep it up. Be the person that delegates and gives that same amount of knowledge outward of yourself. Don't retain it internally, not only for accessibility, but for everything. When you cross-pollinate your teams, that's where like meta success seems to happen for our side.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us today. Thank you so much for your perspective and this wonderful knowledge of knowing how your team does things. And I think we can all grow and be a little elevated from this process. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone who's able to join us. We'll be posting a link in the next few days to be able to catch this on YouTube later if you'd like to share it with others. I'll also go ahead and put a list of these tools right into the Twitter chat feed in case you would like to check any of them out or just bookmark them. And if you have any follow-up questions or thoughts, just go ahead and tag us on Twitter, and we will definitely, well, either us or we'll just ask Sarah to come in and answer for us. And we just appreciate everyone here today. Have a fantastic Tuesday. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.